Hello, and welcome to the last in our mini-series on the pandemic leadership issues that form part of the larger series on leading complexity and inclusion. And today I'm interviewing, or rather speaking to, Kevin Davies. So, Kev, it's great to catch up with you again. It was back in December the 5th, actually, that you launched our public series on leadership, complexity and inclusion. And we had a great response from the people who were there and who saw that subsequently. So could you bring us up to date a little bit? A lot's happened since December.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to share with you again. Yes, gosh, December seemed like a completely different world back then, and lots has happened personally, but obviously to the whole world. We look like we're a different world now. I think at the last talk I did for Keele, I intimated that I was working through a new role, one of a series of roles that I am involved with. What this particular one was on the board of the Local Enterprise Partnership, a role which for me felt a natural progression in terms of my social economic inclusion mission as a social entrepreneur working in education and employment, trying to advance the wider social mobility agenda. When I took on the role back in May, still feeling my feet a little bit with the board and exactly what that portfolio would look like, because it can be a bit amorphous to folks to say, well, what does social mobility mean? What does social enterprise mean? And part of my journey in terms of winning hearts and minds was trying to find some tangible things which people could work on. What I discovered throughout the last year was that our Metro Mayor, Andy Street, folks will know from John Lewis days, is the Mayor of the West Midlands. And one of his agendas was to grow the social economic sector within the West Midlands. And it occurred to me that obviously the Black Country is part of the West Midlands, that it would make sense that we don't try and reinvent the wheel with our objectives and see if we can align with some of their strategy. So probably 6 months prior to my Keele talk, I've been working with partners to see how we could translate some of those aspirations, working with the West Midlands Combined Authority and the Streets team to see how we could work that in the Black Country. And one of the tangible things we thought we could do at the same time was looking at high streets, particularly in the West Midlands and in Walsall, where I'm headquartered, are in decline and really need some reinventing. And this obviously was well before the COVID crisis, where we needed some repurposing. And I managed to galvanise the local authority in Walsall, and then in Dudley. Both of them who are working through new different funds that have been given or promised to by the central government to support town centre reinvention. And I remember the day, it was towards the end of February, well before COVID crisis. And I was in a meeting with the officers, and I was in an old building, an Art Deco building, led by a social entrepreneur friend of mine who could be part of the story for the High Street renewal in the Dudley area. And I thought to myself, I wish he'd put the heating on because it's so cold. But that's not his fault, because it is an old building. And by the end of that meeting, which is a very positive meeting about us saying, actually, let's try and use the High Street as a catalyst for a new work, live, play, learn, worship vision, which galvanizes all sectors and stakeholders within the community. And that, in the first instance, Dudley and Walsall could be the exemplars for that. And then I drove home from that meeting, very positive meeting, still cold. And as I was driving back, I just rang my wife and said, can you just run me a bath, please? Just get in the bath. I'm so cold. And before my next meeting. And I got in that bath and then went straight to bed. And in essence, didn't get up for 2 weeks. And it's only in hindsight now that we think we probably had the COVID symptoms. And why it was a confirmation that probably was the case, although I haven't had the test yet, was I was with my father on the weekend, and he was with my sister who attended a West Indian funeral. And well, I think I called him the day after that meeting in Dudley and said, "Dad, I'm in bed, I'm not well." And he said, "I'm exactly the same, Kevin." And he had all the classic symptoms of loss of taste and smell, and lost a lot of weight. And he was probably out for probably 4 weeks. Now, fortunately, he pulled through, and didn't have to be hospitalised. But there were other people connected with the funeral that my sister went to who contracted what we now think what was COVID. So it had a dramatic impact. And obviously, then we went through lockdown. And as a entrepreneur who has different ventures, we were like everyone else affected by the lockdown period, whether it's our restaurants having to shut down and some staff having to go on furlough, the schools in our group having to effectively not quite be mothballed because they still continue educating the kids remotely, but also keeping the key work staff, children educated on site. Very dramatic challenges for us in that period, which almost brings us up to date as to where we are now, Will.
Can you talk a little bit about, and we'll come back to the health side of what's happened with COVID. In terms of the leadership and organisational side of what happened with COVID, tell us a little bit about how you have had to lead into that, what sort of implications there's been for you as a leader and maybe the organisations that you're involved in. What have you seen as the effects of COVID organisationally?
So when in the early weeks before the official lockdown, we had some mixed messages from the government. Probably the more tangible one for me, which sort of crystallises some of it, was in our social enterprise restaurant, which employs young people, apprentices, traineeships and the like. The government, I think, had announced it was inadvisable for folks to go to restaurants. It wasn't at that point mandatory, and we had to take a moral decision in some respects. Do we continue opening the facility, even though we hadn't got the official mandatory no, on the basis that would harm us commercially? And also at the time when we thought there might have been an opportunity with our insurance cover to pull that down, it wasn't been able to be triggered as a consequence of not having the mandatory thing from government. Hindsight, it wasn't really worth the paper it's written on, because there's very little you can claim from that. And but anyway, we took the decision morally to shut down and send staff home on full pay, and waited to see what would happen next. And that waiting probably was a good long week as to what we do with that side of the operation as well. Obviously, the other things with my wider colleagues on our multi-county trust boards was working through the implications of this situation with our staff, those who were ill or having to shield on behalf of other people, would obviously have a dramatic impact on people's capacity, the organisation's capacity to deliver the essential services for our beneficiaries, our students as well. So those are a real challenge for everyone. The whole issue around obviously when furlough kicked in, which was a godsend in many respects, because it's obviously saved certain aspects of our operation, or allowed it to be mothballed whilst we wondered where this thing was going to go. So those are the key things. Looking after staff who, again, were worried about their jobs, their security, got mortgages, young families. Those are things that are particularly of a concern for myself and my other colleagues as leaders and managers in an operation. Yeah.
And what did it do in terms of your natural leadership style? I mean, compared to pre-COVID to COVID, what changed, if anything, in terms of leadership?
Um, it's a good question. I don't think I've done that big, deep reflection yet, Will, if I'm honest with you. But as you're asking me, obviously I knew I was coming into this conversation with you. I think, like everyone, we've done a lot of thinking in our lockdown time, having to work from home. Also understanding what are the more important things in life. Having had my father have the disease, even myself, and then my aunt having it as well. It sort of put things into perspective about what's this real thing about. And I was very conscious and careful to stay in contact with my staff, even though some of them were on furlough, and keep checking in with those who were having to still work on the front line. It also got me wondering a bit more about what will life look like in the near to long term future. What does the economy look like? I tell you what it did do, though, when we start to get a degree of a new normality. My role on the LEP board, we obviously couldn't meet anymore physically. Like the rest of the world, having to use Teams or Zooms or Blue Jeans or whatever internet intermediary or platform to connect we were using. We had to wait for the legislation to kick in place for us to formally be able to have meetings online. And I think I was supposed to present my board paper about the social economy growth activity in the Black country, but for whatever reason it was delayed prior to the COVID. But what it did do, I think, was when the COVID situation kicked in and we were allowed to meet, it had a particular significance to the rest of the board, because the things we were suggesting were mainly in part, yes, about developing a new economy, but an economy that works for the vulnerable as well. And I think that situation, although how terrible it has been for the economy, terrible for people, has perhaps presented an opportunity for people to start thinking about what really matters, even more so now. And that's exactly what the season is at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that brings us on to another area that links back to you personally being ill, and your family being ill, and then your board paper to the LEP around highlighting some of the vulnerabilities. And in these situations, it's an opportunity perhaps sometimes to reflect on how do we help those people in society who maybe haven't had the equal chances of everyone else. As you know, one of the themes of these public talks is around leadership complexity and inclusion, that whole idea of inclusion. I know that when you came to Keele, you talked about the economy of together. But in terms of the sort of banging issues that sit around COVID, I was talking to Neil Carr, who's the chief exec of one of the NHS trusts, and in talking to him, this situation has highlighted the need to perhaps put some focus and attention on those aspects of our community who are perhaps more impacted by this. What sort of issues did it raise for you? What sort of things happened in that space for you?
Yeah, and the COVID situation, in terms of how it affected me personally, obviously has affected BAME communities particularly significantly. And my aunt passed away as well in the COVID crisis, and we were unable to have the funeral and send off that she deserved. And I don't know if you've been, Will, to West Indian funeral recently, but traditionally they are very well attended affairs, very lively affairs, and are spread out over a number of days, surrounding food, drink, music, and lots of partying and camaraderie, ironically. But we were limited to 10 people just round the graveside. And for me, the cultural side of that is an impact, but more materially is the fact that people were getting ill and dying. And the debate, or the ongoing debate, linked to actually what are some of the injustices that are structural or systemic within our society that are predicating people of colour, BAME communities, to be being affected so terribly by this disease, whether it's the frontline staff in our NHS services, or people in the transport industry, or other perhaps unknown yet health inequalities that predicate people from BAME communities to be impacted by this terrible disease. These are the things which are front and centre. I would suggest part of the wider economic inclusion agenda. I think in the COVID period, the other material significant incident that happened was the incidents in America around George Floyd, which, in conversations with colleagues, to understand why an event in America would have any significance to people in the UK. And when you put it in the context of, well, okay, let's set aside the issues around the criminal justice system. We're not seeing the same sort of scenes on the street as what happened with George Floyd, but we are seeing incidents of people in custody dying unexplainedly from people of colour. The challenges within the criminal justice system, where there's imbalances to how BAME citizens are being treated, those are issues which aren't new. The other issues are, for me, was also about the Windrush situation, which I think at my Keele talk I talked about my late grandmother was part of that generation, and about how some people were terribly treated in terms of their access to services because for whatever reason the system wasn't able to recognise their long-standing status. Those are material issues, and the questions I've been asking myself personally, and constructive discussions with people, is what are we going to do about it? The COVID situation has made it even more so prominent to people, as well as the George Floyd protests that have come to the UK, who actually say, whether you agree with the political movement Black Lives Matter or not, one is sure that everyone could agree with that sentiment that Black lives do matter. Black lives do matter with COVID. Black lives do matter with people's access to the education and employment market. I chair an initiative called The Ladder, which was this newspaper initiative, which I mentioned at the last Keele talk, to encourage employers and to work with government to take on apprentices. One saying I heard from some of the briefing meetings I've had about how we address the crisis with mass unemployment is that there's going to be a tsunami of, particularly amongst young people, of people looking for jobs or who've lost their jobs. And then the other stats are they would disproportionately hurt people from BAME communities. So whether you don't agree with that there are translatable issues from the George Floyd situation, which I would contest, what you can't argue with is that COVID has and will have an effect on BAME communities, and that we need to be cognizant as fellow citizens together how we address those matters. And I'm tasked, or more so tasked now in terms of my leadership role, to try and address that.
Yeah, and just to sort of think about some final thoughts. We were chatting the other day about your thought that there needs to be some 10-year type activities, that this isn't something we can sort in the short term, although the George Floyd situation and the impact that had did raise some of these issues in the public consciousness to a degree that perhaps weren't there before, and did start some questioning of, hang on a minute, what's been going on under the surface. The combination of COVID and George Floyd seems to create some sort of flashpoint activity. How is that an opportunity? But although some short-term things have to happen, what are your thoughts over the next 10 years? What sort of things do you hope to be doing, as we come out of lockdown, as lockdown measures ease, notwithstanding, any concerns over a second spike and all that sort of thing?
When I was at when I did the Keele talk last time, and some of the reflections we had about using the high street as a totem, a catalyst for people to be thinking about a more inclusive economy, because a lot of people are interested in the high street, councillors, people that reminisce about how high street used to look. My view was this was a 10-year journey, that this wouldn't change overnight, but conscious that 10 years is a long time away, and then we therefore need to punctuate it with some short and mid-term objectives as well. Equally, the matters that have been raised by the George Floyd incident, the Black Lives Matter conversation, is not an issue that will be resolved in 6 weeks. And I'm already conscious that it's moved from the front pages and from the headlines already. And so our response could either be, well, that was the moment, and then we went into the same old. I know organisations are making some, I would say, initial symbolic steps to align themselves with trying to address some of the wrongs. But obviously we need to go past that to deal with some of these structural issues. And so in my response now, in terms of the conversations I'm having with some of the things I'm doing, is that the wider economic inclusion agenda is not just about how many shops we can get open. It is definitely about how we can address some of these structural issues. And what I don't want it to be, Will, in the conversations, well, this is the BAME issue and it's siloed off there. My argument that this is as well as a social issue, it's an economic issue. We need all our talents realised, and BAME communities have so much to bring and add, and so we should remove any obstacle that stops them from advancing educationally, advancing in starting up businesses, stop them from being the first in line for losing their jobs. These are important things for us to be able to address in this period. And yes, I'm already in discussions with different organisations and civic organisations that want to take a long-term view on this one. But we could do it punctuating with some short, mid-term, long-term matters that address these issues. That's encouraging a wider discussion, debate about what's being taught in our schools, so we have a fuller history rather than just select special months of the year. Whether that's encouraging people of colour to go into particular industry areas, and then supporting how they can actually advance into those strategic decision-making situations, boardrooms or senior leadership teams where they aren't proportionately present, or how we can make sure investment can go in to help them develop their social businesses, because and ordinary businesses, for profit businesses, so that our economy can turn. So I think we have an opportunity in the hell that has been COVID to try and bring something good out of this situation with where we're at the moment. Okay, Kev, that's brilliant. Thanks for that. I really appreciate you catching us up with where you're at and giving us some real insight into those issues. Any final thoughts? Yeah, it would be very easy for us to try and rush back into what was before. I think we need to take hold of some of the things, if you have done those reflections about what is really important in life. Cherish your family, because people have gone into hospital and not come out. Cherish those relationships very well. Think about this is not just about how we make the bottom line. Your employees, some of them you'll be saying goodbye to. Your work colleagues you'll be saying goodbye to because the businesses that they're in aren't sustainable. Try and cherish those moments and look for opportunities. Whoever's listening to this cast, whether it's from the public sector, private sector, to see how we can try and do the economy of together thing, work together, think outside the box a lot more and address those issues. And yes, let's take a long-term view with some short-term, even if there's symbolic actions about how we can address some of those challenges
BAME, absolutely, but our young people as well. We need to do some real courageous things this season, and I want to be part of that, and I'm hoping there'll be a lot of other people who've got that same heart as well.
Well, Kev, I've known you now for quite a number of years, and I know that you've inspired our students when you came to speak on our business communities in December. I'm sure that as people listen to this, that it will create food for thought, it will create stimulus, and I know that you're getting involved in lots of different areas of business, society, influence in politics, government. So wish you all the best with that, Kevin, and thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Will. Take care.
Well, that brings our mini-series on the pandemic leadership interviews to a close. Of course, we will continue with our public lecture series on leadership, complexity and inclusion, so please do join us for that. Those videos will be placed on this playlist. But for now, stay safe and thank you for being with us.